Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is a Ukraine War Update Extra video, giving you the juicy nuggets and extra information to give you a better and greater appreciation and understanding of the Ukraine War. Where shall we start? Well, let's go to Biden and Bradley's. So, yes, Biden tells reporters on a tarmac in Kentucky when asked if Bradley fighting vehicles are on the table for Ukraine. Confirms our scoop, says reporter Jennifer Jacobs. Now, this has caused a big stir. I'm going to talk about an awful lot of equipment that's going Ukraine's way, but the Bradleys are a big one. Mark Hertling and I already have given you some information that he's told the world. He was a former, or he is a former Bradley infantry fighting vehicle crew member in the Gulf War. He said, while Americans are focused on the House and the election of the Speaker, Ukraine continues to fight, and the US and NATO continues to look for viable solutions for equipping and supporting Ukraine on the battlefield. Many rumors the last few days, what might happen? A thread. So a few days ago, Bloomberg was first to report, and that's what I just referred to, a possibility of US sending Bradley fighting vehicles to Ukraine. In my opinion, this is a great idea, something I support wholeheartedly. Why? As I said a few days ago, and I did report this, I was a Brad commander in Desert Storm. So that's what an infantry fighting vehicle looks like, in case you are unaware. Some people have called it a light tank. Oh, that's going to get tankers really annoyed. And I'll talk about that in a second. The Brad, or IFV CFV, so that's infantry fighting vehicle, which is a kind of APC with a gun or some missiles on top, tow missile systems, or CFV, which is cavalry fighting vehicle, is not a tank, but it can be a tank killer, he says, and a troop carrier. On the turret, there are two TOW anti-tank missiles, 25mm Bush master chain gun, 762 coaxial machine gun, all effective at long ranges. It depends what you got on top of it, of course. Two pictures of our CFV from 1991. The first variant of the Brad with poor man sandbags and add-on luggage rack. That's there. This was a great vehicle. We effectively engaged Iraqi tanks, BMPs, and other targets. Our cavalry troop was in the Battle of the Medina Ridge. So there he is with his Bradley. He's a big fan of the Bradley, as you can see from what he's saying. While a tracked vehicle, it doesn't have a lot of complicated engine or turret issues. Good gas mileage, maximum speed of about 40 miles an hour cross country, low maintenance, solid protection and firepower. The infantry variants has a lot of room in the back for troops. So that's really good. That's what you're going to want, is low maintenance, cheap to run, easy to fix. Another rumor the last few days has been that Macron of France has promised some AMX 10RC tank killers, also not a tank. Debatable. We're going to debate that. It doesn't really matter, but just a bit of fun. To Zelensky, a great piece of kit: 105mm main cannon, a 12.7 anti-air machine gun, and a 762 coaxial machine gun. Wheels are not tracked. These are also low maintenance, high mileage, easy to support, and great cross country on any kind of terrain. I also suspect Biden and NATO will push Germany to provide their equivalent of these two vehicles, the Marder. The vehicle supports a Milan anti-tank missile system, a 20mm cannon, and also a 762 machine gun. The advantage of all three is their firepower, great cross-country mobility, low maintenance, easy repair, and small logistics trail. None are tanks, which many will still scream about, but they will allow Ukraine's emerging combined arms team to conduct high-tempo maneuver. A downside: the training, repair parts, and repair techniques are not interchangeable, but they'll be easy to incorporate on the battlefield. They are all deadly against Russian equipment, including tanks. The anti-tank missiles have a longer range than the Russian tank cannon, which means they can sit further back from the tanks and take the tanks out. That's massively important. If I were a Ukrainian commander, I'd be exceedingly happy to field any or all of these, especially in the southern theatre. That's because it's drier, the ground is easier to drive quickly across. Also, I suspect we'll now see NATO rounds of support in the coming weeks and plans to train Ukrainian combined arms teams, but that's just a guess. There is talk that NATO are going to step up. There's going to be, it's quite exciting right now as far as equipment's concerned, because I think the West has realized that actually Russia aren't going to start pressing the nuclear button, it would give more and more stuff. So let's just give them a bunch of stuff. Obviously, everyone's waiting for long-range missile capability. It could be that the Ukrainians, we give the Ukrainians the capability of making these themselves, and then it's like, hey, we didn't give them anything; they made it themselves. You're having a war with them; they've got the right to defend themselves. This is so more equipment, terrific contribution from Czech Republic to Ukraine. So this is 152 self-propelled howitzer or self-propelled gun on its way to Ukraine. Ukraine will receive a total of 26 of these self-propelled howitzers and DM1CZ ammunition with range of up to 25.5 kilometers. So another really useful um, uh, addition. So, as someone says, unfortunately, it's a 152 caliber gun. From what I understand, there isn't a lack of 152 chews, but 152 shells. What our Eastern brothers from Slovakia sent their modern 155 development of the platform is more valuable. So, there's lots of talk about, ammunition at the moment and being able to provide that, but that is also a great addition. Now, 42 Turkish Kirpi echelon spotted in Romania. Turkey intended to send 150 of these to Ukraine. Well, here's 42 of them, and that again is great. Let's see more of this. Turkey successfully sort of playing both sides in this war, but yeah, good that they are providing a whole bunch of stuff here. I mean, that's a long train with a lot of equipment, and those are going to hopefully be useful for. They look like MRAPs, useful for the Ukrainians. To add to that, we're starting to see these Slovenian donated M55. So this is based on the T55, an old tank, but it's been seriously updated. So M55S in service with the Ukrainian 47th Brigade. Ukrainian forces already appear to have added a significant amount of extra protection, including Contact 1 ERA and cage armor. ERA is explosive reactive armor. So this is when you projectile hits that, it actually makes an explosion, but the explosion is forcing the projectile backwards. And there's some kind of cope caging going on there. But these have been quite seriously updated. They're not going to be your main battle tank, but certainly maybe, an auxiliary battle tank will be useful for the Ukrainians. The M55 is a heavily upgraded T55 with 105mm NATO standard main gun, so that's important. It's got a NATO gun, which means providing the ammo for that is going to be somewhat easier. Additional Raphael era, again, explosive reactive armor, upgraded FCS system, and a Leard 1A laser illumination warning receiver. So it's kitted up pretty nicely, and yeah, that's hopefully will be of use to the Ukrainians. We're starting to see them. 10 on the battlefield. Norway have confirmed it's donated another 10,000 artillery shells to Ukraine. Hugely important. The artillery shells can be used in several types of artillery fire, including in the M109 that Norway has already donated. And as we saw earlier, that the echelon of Turkish gear there. And then we're going to get onto the French, right? So this is a pretty cool story if this is how it happened. So this morning, info appears that Rogozin, who's a Russian, through the French ambassador to Russia, handed over to Macron a fragment from a shell fired from a Caesar. That's a French Caesar. That's a self-propelled howitzer, self-propelled gun, which was pulled out Rogozin's spine. Right. This evening, info appears that France will transfer AMX-10 to Ukraine. Coincidence? I don't think so. So there's this theory that actually, I mean, they were going to do this anyway. They can't just pull this out of the bag like that. But the announcement is quite delicious. Like Russia give France a really pointed. Here's a piece of fragment from one of your self-propelled guns. How do you feel about that? And France go, okay, we're going to give Ukraine a whole load more stuff. How do you feel about that? So I think that's quite delicious. And I'm going to give props to Macron here. And this is for tous ceux qui sont français. Here. Macron has got some bad press over the length of the war, partly because I think he's positioning himself to be the mediator, a bit like Erdogan in Turkey wanted to be the mediator, but was possibly in a better place to be so. Macron, I think, was just, wanting to appear to be important and to be crucial for delivering some kind of peace plan and a resolution to the war. But Ukraine weren't ready for peace. He was fielding a lot of phone calls with Putin and then realized he wasn't getting anywhere with Putin because Putin is Putin. And lots of people were slagging Macron and France off. People were slagging France off as well because they didn't appear to be giving lots of equipment to Ukraine. However, the French have traditionally not been very loud or communicative with announcing equipment to anywhere in the world. They're quite secretive um, with their defense industry. Their defense industry, I think, is the third. I've reported this before. It is the third biggest defense producing country in the world. So export wise, so they're the third biggest military exporter. They are huge. People often don't recognize that, the French. Well, now Macron has been sort of putting his money where his mouth is, or putting his mouth where his money is, actually, and stepping up. New Year, France said they will stand with Ukraine without fail. So France will stand by Ukraine until its victory. French President Emmanuel Macron has said in the New Year's Eve speech. In the year that is starting, he says, we will stand by you without fail. And that is huge. For him to say that in a New Year's Eve speech, which is to your domestic audience, he is saying, we are going to stand by Ukraine without fail. So that's France in there for the long term. That is massively important and shouldn't be underplayed. France is a big player and should be a big player and is also, so what we sometimes also forget is that EU nations are already providing a whole bunch of stuff through the EU. So when people look at France, say, "Oh, they're not doing very much." Well, actually, they are funding the EU contributions to the tune of 25%. So when the EU are giving X billion euros to Ukraine, a quarter of that is French. So it's easy to say, oh, France hadn't done this when you compare France to another country, like the US. But when you compare France plus their EU contributions to another country, actually, the figures look different. So Macron slams nations saying, this is just going back to September. I'm just trying to give France and Macron a bit of props here. So Macron slams nations staying neutral on Ukraine as complicit with Russia, which is a strong statement. This is back in September. He's saying, hang on, if you're neutral, if you're sitting by in the UN and abstaining from your votes on Russia, if you are not sanctioning Russia, if you're sitting there going, well, it's not our problem, then that is being complicit with Russia. That is basically effectively justifying what Russia is doing and giving them some kind of justification for their activities. So, as he says, those who are silent today are serving, whether against their will or secretly with a certain complicity, the cause of a new imperialism. And he was talking about a return to the age of imperialism and colonies. There's a really interesting piece, and I said this on my discussion last night with Dr. Darren Gerdes. When you look at this was on Ukraine, the latest podcast from the Telegraph. When you look at Russia's imperialism and colonialism and compare it to, say, the British Empire, right? We sailed around the world. We got off boats and we stuck our flags in different nations and said, "There we go. We're going to exploit your nation." By the way, I'm going to be back over there across the sea. I'm going to leave a couple of people here, but we're going to exploit your nation. Use all of your natural resources, and you'll be part of the British Empire. Yay, you, and yay, us. And that was our way of doing doing an empire. So we had an empire, whereas Russia is in an empire. So what they would do is go to other surrounding nations, not over the other side of the world by boat, but surrounding nations, and assimilate that population into their own. Intermix. They'd send a bit like what's happened in Crimea. So in Crimea, you've got this area of Ukraine where they annexed it, They drew a line in the sand and said, "We own this now." And then they repopulated it with a bunch of Russians, and those Ukrainians who are really pro-Ukrainian moved out of Crimea, and those who are pro-Russian stayed, and other Russian and Russians came to live there, and then you get this sort of, you know, gradual generational shift towards a population that is effectively Russian. And what the Ukraine want to do is stop that now before it goes on for much longer, because then it's going to be much more difficult to say, actually, this is Ukrainian land, we'll have that back, because most of the population there will be effectively Russian. That's their way of doing an empire, which is uh, for the populations that they take over, they don't control them from afar and have a few of their own people in that country. That country becomes part of Russia, and it is population wise is just a very different approach to doing empire. So anyway, so going back to Macron, that's really good positioning for Macron more recently, starting from sort of September onwards, by the looks of it. And that then, you know, doesn't force EU's hand, but the EU goes along with that. And after a call with Zelensky, this is after New Year, von der Leyen says the EU stands by Ukraine for as long as it takes. This is the right kind of rhetoric. This is what we want from all the nations. America's done it, the UK's done it, the EU's done it, and nations within the EU. It'd be nice if maybe Viktor Orban was somehow deposed. Um, I would like that to happen democratically, but he's changed all the rules such that it's particularly difficult for that to happen. So I don't know. Anyway, I don't want to go off on a rant there. So France, what have they given? So they promised to give a bunch of these MX-10s and Bastion. And in fact, the claim that Macron made was, we're going to give you these light tanks, and this has sent everyone into all of a flutter. So France will supply AMX-10RC armored vehicles to Ukraine, says Reuters, based on sources from the Elysee Palace. French president reportedly told Zelensky this in a phone call, and that is what it is. That's the kit there. It's 6 wheels, fairly short wheelbase, and a big old gun on top. And there you go. They're also going to send 20 Bastion APCs, armored personnel carriers. They look pretty decent as well. Now, the idea that these AMXs are light tanks, and as Noel Report said here, Western-made APCs and light tanks, is made people like Oryx, who are the open source collators of the stats for lost equipment on Russia and the Ukrainian sides, thought this could come in handy for journalists. So he's slagging off journalists for calling things like Bradleys and these AMXs light tanks. He said, this is a tank. This is not a tank. This is Thomas the Tank Engine. Bit of tongue-in-cheek there. But then, blasphemy, I have no other word for it, says Oryx, as someone has then tagged him into this documentation. The jury is in. The MX-10RC is a tank. Citroën tank, but a tank. So says the Treaty on Conventional Armed Forces in Europe. And there's a documentation on how these things are actually defined. The term battle tank means a self-propelled armored fighting vehicle capable of heavy firepower, primarily of a high muzzle velocity direct fire main gun, necessary to engage armored and other targets with high cross-country mobility, with a high level of self-protection, and which is not designed and equipped primarily to transport combat troops. Such armored vehicles serve as a principal weapon system of a ground force tank and other armored formations. Battle tanks are tracked armored fighting vehicles which weigh at least 16.5 metric tons unladen weight, and which are armed with 360-degree traverse gun of at least 75 millimeters caliber. In addition, any wheeled armored fighting vehicles entering into service which meet all the other criteria stated above shall also be deemed battle tanks. Oh, wow. So this has then sent lots of people nuts. And then just realized that this lovely chart is suddenly newsworthy. So Shashank Joshi, the defense correspondent for The Economist, then gives this really quite interesting bit of kind of one of these almost logic puzzles things. It's a form of Carroll, well, it is a Carroll diagram. So a doctrine purist and a structure purist will say the T-55 here is a tank because it fulfills doctrine, which is a tank is to be used for breakthrough and exploitation into the enemy rear, but it's also structured like a tank. So functionally a tank and structurally a tank. A tank is a heavily armored ground combat vehicle with a full rotating turret and tracks. So this is like your purist here. But then if your doctrine is neutral, well, it doesn't have to be for breakthrough and exploitation in the enemy rear. Tank is also to be used for assault, exploitation, direct troop support, and mobile defense. Then the chieftain becomes a tank. Possibly there's something different about the way that it's used than the T55. And then you say, well, doctrine, a tank can be used for anything it's good at. Basically, a tank is just, you can use it for whatever. You can use it to, I don't know, plant flowers in. But as long as it looks like a tank, it's a tank. It's just a tank that you've got flowers growing out of, right? So that's a way of seeing it there. The structure neutral is to say that, okay, for the doctrine purist, it's going to be used for a breakthrough and exploitation into the enemy rear, but it can also be just an armored ground combat vehicle with a turret and tracks. Well, that's got a tiny turret on the side there and it's got tracks. That's a tank. Would it still be defined as a tank for the structured purist? Possibly not. And then you so on and so forth. And then for the doctrine radical, something like an IFV, an infantry fighting vehicle, you can use it for whatever. And actually, structurally, it's got a turret and tracks. Well, actually, the Bradley BMP2 is a tank, right? Okay, interesting. The structure radical, which is a tank, is a ground combat vehicle. It doesn't have to conform to these particular criteria, structurally speaking. Or in that case, the STR V103, I think that's a Swedish tank manufacturer, or not tank manufacturer. The AMX 10RC, because it's neutral doctrine, it's used for assault, exploitation, direct troop support, and mobile defense. And it doesn't have to have tracks. And then of course this one. Doctrine radical, so it can be used for whatever. Structure radical, hey, it can look like whatever. A Toyota Land Cruiser is a tank. There you go. So somewhere along here, everyone fits, right? And some people will say T55 is a tank. I could bore you about the philosophy of language here. So dictionaries are descriptive, which means that when you look up a word in the dictionary and it says this is what it means this is how people use it to mean that. It doesn't have to mean that. You get certain words that are now become contronyms. A contronym is a word meaning the opposite of what it originally meant. So it literally means the opposite to what it. So literally is one of the most famous contronyms because people are now say, "Oh, mate, he was literally on fire on the football pitch." It's like, no, he wasn't. He wasn't actually on fire. What you're saying, he was metaphorically on fire. But because so many people use that word to now mean metaphorically, that literally, in some dictionary definitions, means both literally and metaphorically. It means the opposite to what it means. So it's become a contronym. Dictionaries are descriptive and not prescriptive. In other words, language can be used however you like it, as long as it's, I guess, being useful for you, as long as you're communicating a message. And if the person you're speaking to understands what you mean, then functionally, job done for language. You know, we write the laws by consensus, right? By writing dictionaries, but in a sense, they're not laws; they're just descriptions. Um, anyway, you get different theories of language there, and my opinion is that language is descriptive, but it's often nice to have rules in place so that we have a guidance to be able to teach language to others, but also so we're all clear on what we all mean. Um, is that a tank? I don't know. You guys have a big argument. I'm of the opinion that yeah, whatever. Yeah, I understand what you mean by a tank. Yeah, it's got wheels. It's not got a track. Okay, it's almost a tank. It's a wheeled tank. I don't know. Whatever. I'm not overly bothered, but some people get their knickers in a right old twist, and there you go. So on the MX-10, it says Shashank Joshi, well, actually reporting from Technology Org, it has armor-piercing round capable of defeating a standardized NATO single heavy tank target with 150 mil armor thickness. So that gun can do some damage at a range of 1,200 meters, and a NATO triple heavy tank target at a range of 2,200 meters. Wow. It's a bit of an oddity. It was conceived for recon and fire support, and in the 1980s was the heaviest armored vehicle designed to be designed to the Rapid Action Force, an aeromobile force of 5 divisions, which was supposed to rush through Germany to engage the Soviet First Echelon. And that's the official communique from Macron to Zelensky, confirming, quote, delivery of the first time of French-built light combat tanks to Ukraine. Interestingly, it stresses that this is a first, as Macron has long refused to get into a numbers race and sets it in context of France increasing military aid. So that is important. The debate over whether the AMX tank is really a tank seems to be somewhat missing the point. This is a step change for France in its support for Ukraine. Macron is calling them light tanks, and it is a leadership bid to get other Western countries to move. Agreed. Like, whatever you want to call it, this is actually a bit of a step change for Macron, A, in the way that he's announcing it, and B, with what he's announcing. And this should start the ball rolling. Germany are now going to be thinking, okay, maybe we can provide our Leopard 2s. Maybe that's something that's going to happen soon. Rob Lee says about this 2 points. Ukraine will now have a system with a new type of ammunition, which will add. So the thing about the AMX is it doesn't fire. It fires weird ammunition, which is another headache for the Ukrainians, who have like so many different systems to deal with, and they've done an amazing job. Don't get me wrong, but wow, how difficult is their logistics map, and how difficult is you know is it for how much of a challenge is it for them to get the required ammunition? Ukraine now have a system with a new type of ammunition which will add logistics complexities but should help alleviate ammunition shortages for the 125mm tank rounds. So on the one hand, it uses different stuff, but on the other hand, that's not then taking from the pool of ammunition stocks needed for other things. This has special ammunition, so get that separately. This is another step in the Ukrainian military adopting NATO equipment, which will continue. And he continues, one of the main factors for further arms deliveries isn't just about these systems' advantages, but whether Ukraine's existing systems will have enough ammo 6 to 12 months from now. Better to start training Ukrainian soldiers sooner before ammo shortages have an operational effect. So there you go. I've actually decided to cut my extra video today into two because it was a big one, bumper news, and I'll just do this tank analysis that I've done, and you can watch the rest tomorrow with some extra, uh, and that allows you to have more time to go for a walk, take in some fresh air, do what you like. But anyway, it's split in two. Please like, subscribe, share. I want to just give some props to people who have helped out loads recently. Here's a shout out to the new members of the channel who have joined: Mark Schwarman, Hans-Peter Nielsen, Tyler Crockett, John Lloyd, Memoz, Mitch Mazarol, Kevin Alexander, Ioannis Kilioris, Ian Ratner. Thank you so much for your support. I'm going to try and put out the odd sort of bit of content for these good people who are supporting the channel, members only content, but or other perks I can think of. But thank you so much for your support. It really does mean a lot, and it allows me to continue doing what I do. At the moment, I seem to have no time to do anything else at the moment. I'm spending a lot of time feeding my obsession, and hopefully feeding your obsession as well. And can I just say a big thanks also to people on PayPal and Buy Me a Coffee. So on PayPal, props to Jan Narkiewicz, Dmitry Valentin, who else? Richard Keck, Jacob Passman, Del Dakin, Jonathan Cairns, Legends One and All, and others. Hadju Imri, Andrzej Urdovics, JG Bashlow, Mark Schwarman again, others, Egon Frederickson, Davinci, Neil, Ian Ratner again. Thank you so much for your massive generosity on all of these platforms. Honestly, it is, as I keep saying, like, without that, literally I wouldn't be providing content. So it's that simple. So thank you. And I know I go on a lot and I ramble, but I hope I provide something for some people that they find useful or enjoyable or informative or whatever. Thank you.